everybody, my name is Hope and welcome back to my channel. I like musicals, they're a big part of my life, and today I'm going to teach you all about musicals. So if there's one thing that you can tell from this channel, it's that I like musicals and I like them a lot. But I feel like a lot of people who talk to me ask me a lot of questions about musicals because so shockingly, even though they're doing musical theatre, they don't know anything about musicals. So I thought I would give you kind of a quick rundown of kind of all the basic things that you need to know about musicals. But before I get into this video, remember that you can like, comment, subscribe, do all of that fun stuff. You can also follow me on social media, which is XHopeWilsonX on Instagram, and HopeWilson45 on TikTok and Twitter. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm going to talk about composers first. If someone's asking you about a musical, you probably want to know who the composers are, and majority of the time it's going to be one of these people. Number one is Stephen Sondheim. Stephen Sondheim wrote things like Company, Sunday in the Park with George, Follies. He wrote the lyrics to Gypsy, but he didn't write the music. Same with West Side Story, he wrote the lyrics but not the music. Sweeney Todd, Into the Woods, all of these shows. This is Sondheim's sound, and Sondheim has quite a particular sound. It's a lot of patter, it's a lot of odd rhythms and harmonies, but he's also like the best in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. I love Stephen Sondheim, if you didn't already know. Then you have people like Stephen Schwartz. Stephen Schwartz wrote things like Wicked. He also wrote the music to The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Children of Eden, and Pippin. All of these are his shows. Then you have Alan Menken. Alan Menken did all the Disney shows, so literally anything Disney or Disney related. He probably wrote the music, kind of apart from like Frozen. If it's anything else, he probably wrote the music. You have Andrew Lipper. Andrew Lipper wrote things like The Wild Party, John and Jen, which no one will know, but I like. You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, A Little Princess, Big Fish. He wrote all of those. And then there's also Andrew Lloyd Webber, who wrote Cats, Starlight Express, Phantom of the Opera, Love Never Dies, School of Rock. You've got Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote Hamilton, In the Heights, 21 Jump Street. You have Rodgers and Hammerstein, who wrote pretty much all your legit shows, your Cinderella, your Sound of Music, Carousel, King and I, Oklahoma, all of those. And Kander and Ebb, who wrote Cabaret and Chicago and Kiss the Spider Woman and Steel Pit, things like that. So these composers are the people that you're probably going to come across the most. If you see a musical, it's probably, I will say probably, going to be written by one of them. There are also a couple of others. You have Jason Howland and Mindy Dickstein, who wrote like Little Women, Shaman and Whitman, who wrote Catch Me If You Can, also with the Smash stuff, Pascal Paul, who wrote like Dogfight and stuff like that. So there are other composing duos and people, but I will say for the majority, it's probably going to be, if it's old, it's probably going to be Rodgers and Hammerstein. If it's 70s, it's probably going to be Sondheim or Kander and Ebb. And then when you're looking into more 90s stuff, you're looking into Andrew Lloyd Webber. And when you're looking into 2000s, you're looking at Lipper, and Schwartz kind of was like early 2000s, late 90s. Obviously, Lin-Manuel Miranda is much more contemporary. Same with Pascal Paul, Shaman and Whitman. They're a bit more contemporary. But yes, these are the people that you're going to come across. And it's important to know who wrote what, because when you're looking at musicals, if you like a certain composer, you'll probably like a lot of their stuff. Sondheim is the big one for this. His music sounds different, but it's all the same. If you like one Sondheim, you're probably going to like them all, and that's kind of how it works. But yeah, that's kind of all you need to know about composers. Just know who the composers are and the kind of shows that they wrote, because it will just help you out in the long run. Okay, then you have your musical styles. So starting kind of from like early, you have like opera and operetta, moving into legit and like jazz kind of era. Then you have like your contemporary legits, which is kind of like 70s way, and Sondheim kind of sits on his own, but he sits in that 70s bracket. Then you start going into early contemporary musical theatre and into standard contemporary musical theatre, which kind of leans into pop rock. And those are kind of the things across the styles. So legit is like obviously derived from like opera and operetta. And if you want to know the difference, operetta shows are just not sung the whole way through. So an opera is typically sung the whole way through in operatic style, and an operetta is sang like the songs in operatic style, but then there's like also like a storytelling element and like a spoken word element, which is why it's different from an opera and is kind of like a halfway house between opera and legit musical theatre. Now, legit musical theatre, like I said, Rodgers and Hammerstein were kind of like the starters of that. There are other people like Irving Berlin, Jerome Kern, Jerry Bott, and I can't remember his name, but his last name is Hart, and he was Rodgers from Rodgers and Hammerstein's original writing partner. Just for a little fun fact for you there. They kind of paved the way for musicals in general. They became popular kind of in like wartime. Oklahoma, I think, was kind of the big one that set us off. Now, there's not really much that you need to know here, but legit musical theatre theatre is usually all your old school stuff. There's very few contemporary musicals which have a legit style. You could definitely say things like A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, for example, is a legit musical in a contemporary. So I would count it as a legit show, but I would not count it as an early musical theatre show, which is typically a pre-1965. If you're like auditioning, you could definitely use it for a legit show, but you'd have to understand that it's not from a legit early musical theatre show, if that makes sense. Moving into contemporary legit, excluding Sondheim, because like I said, he's kind of his own person because he's amazing like that. Contemporary legit very much started to introduce the world of mixing and belting, which is just basically unheard of in early legit musical theatre. This is just an extra fun fact, but Oscar Hammerstein II, who was part of Rodgers and Hammerstein, was Stephen Sondheim's mentor, and Stephen Sondheim then went on to mentor people like Jonathan Larson, who wrote Rent, and also Lin-Manuel Miranda, who I'm sure you all know wrote Hamilton, like I said before. So yeah, contemporary legit is kind of from like 1970 to probably like 1995-ish, that kind of era, and they very much started implementing these contemporary styles that we see now, like belting and mixing and, you know, getting higher. Then you have your early 2000s, which was the start of contemporary musical theatre. You will still find there's some contemporary legit influence. There's definitely some like older stuff in there, but we are very much starting to sit in a place of, you know, Wicked was written in 2003. I was born in the same year as Wicked. How crazy is that? I think Wicked is like 4 days older than me, which is kind of crazy. It's coming up on the anniversary, clearly. But yeah, so contemporary musical theatre very much starts in the early 2000s, and I think music in general kind of had an influence on that. Obviously the 90s, we had like hip hop, and pop music was really starting to, you know, unironically pop off in the early 2000s, and so that was definitely an influence. And then moving into contemporary musical theatre, now 2000s contemporary and 2010s contemporary, 2020s contemporary aren't overly different in style, but more so in the way that they performed. So I think Wicked done in 2003 and Wicked done now probably vocally are quite different, because now it's all about belting, it's all about who can belt the highest, and people obviously have varying opinions on whether that's good or not, but that is kind of the way that musical theatre is working at this current point in time. But it's important to understand the difference between the styles and where they came from and who influenced them, which is why I talked about composers first, because the composers really went with the times, and they're the ones who are the driving force of how musical theatre changes. Important shows to note. Now this is kind of a complex one, because you could argue that every show is important in its own way, but I would say mega musicals are your friend. If you don't know what a mega musical is a musical that is performed the same everywhere. So things like Cats and Wicked and Les Mis technically still counts as a mega musical, even though they're doing like a changed version now, but it's still a mega musical because if you were to put it on, it would look the same everywhere you go. These are important to know because they are the staples of musical theatre. Cats is, I don't know if it still is actually, but has been at one point one of the longest running Broadway shows. And, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of Cats, but it's an important one to know. Things like Les Mis, Phantom of the Opera is also in there. They're important to know because they are like I said, the staples of musical theatre and what musical theatre is about. If we're talking on more of a general scope, I would say things like Carousel and Oklahoma, probably quite important to know as they're like really important legit musicals. Things like Cabaret, again, quite a mainstream musical now, but wasn't so much back then, but an important one to know about. And I would also say that you need to know at least one Sondheim musical. I would always recommend Company, but that's because it's my favourite. But I'd probably say the most generally accessible Broadway Sondheim is Sweeney Todd. And I just think Sweeney Todd is such a masterpiece of theatre that I think it's really important that people know, because I think it really set the standard in the 70s for the quality of musicals. And I think you can definitely tell how Sondheim influenced the quality of musicals that were making it to the stage. Okay, so let's talk about theatres. So I found that not a lot of people know this, but the difference between a Broadway and an off-Broadway theatre and a West End and an off-West End theatre is the number of seats. A Broadway theatre, as far as I'm aware, has over 1,000 seats, and anything that has under 1,000 seats is classed as an off-Broadway theatre. I'm actually not entirely sure if it's the same number here in the UK, but I think that's still how it works. It counts as an off-West End theatre if it doesn't have enough seats, whatever that limit may be here. There's typically a tier system, but depending on the size of the theatre will depend on how many, but the stalls is the baseline, and then you have the circle and the grand circle, and then in the US I think it's the stalls and then the mezzanine, and then I think it is also the grand circle, the top one, but correct me if I'm wrong. And you can also have different kinds of staging. You can have proscenium arch, which is just facing 1, so like this. Then you have thrust, which is 3, traverse, which is 2, and in the round, which is all the way around. The way that the stage works is also like a map. This is going to sound confusing, but to me, downstage is upstage and upstage is downstage. If someone tells you to move downstage, you're moving towards them. If you're moving upstage, you're moving back. I always imagine it like a ramp. So if the ramp is at the top and coming down, you're going up the ramp or you're going down the ramp. I don't know why I remember it that way, I just do. And stage left is your left. So if you're stood on the stage facing the audience, stage left is to your left and stage right is to your right. I think this is going to be flipped, so I'm actually going to have done the opposite, but I promise you, I was doing left and right, I promise. Theatres also cost like thousands of pounds to run, and obviously within that you'll have a cast, general cast, and then you'll have covers and understudies who will probably be in that ensemble in like a track or a swing, but they will cover lead roles. So an understudy or a first cover would be the first person to go on if the person who normally plays that role is out. And if the first cover isn't available, it goes to the second cover. If the second cover isn't available, it will go to the third cover. Now, these also come under swings and standby. So a standby normally will be there every night and will go on in case of emergency in certain roles. Really depends on the show. And then a standby can also have set shows for things like Sunset Boulevard and Wicked. The understudy or the standby will have a set show because you're not supposed to be doing that role 8 times a week because it's killer, and that's the way it works. And then a swing is an ensemble member that will cover multiple tracks. So a cover will usually cover 1 or 2. A swing can cover up to 8, and they will also cover ensemble tracks. So if someone in the ensemble is out, they can then fill in. There is also a thing called a split track or a split show. So if somebody's out and they need one person here, and then like later in the number they need someone over there, someone will do a split track. So they'll do half of one track and then change midway, which requires a lot of talent, let me tell you. And then I said a split show, I meant a cut show. A cut show is where they take things out of the show when they're missing certain people if they need to. Is there a difference between Broadway and West End? No, not really. It's really just the pay. That's the difference. Equity here and in America is very different. In America, you have equity tours and non-equity tours, whereas in the UK, everyone can just audition for everything. The only difference is that as a member of equity, you have certain rights. It's kind of like actors insurance, I guess. I think that's a way to describe it, but that's what equity is. I think also things like fandoms are important to talk about. Certain shows have large fandoms which impact the show. I'd say things like Six is definitely one that has a massive fandom, and I think that it really changed the course of the show, but kind of changed musical theatre in general because of that. People want to see a certain person in a certain role, and that's kind of where stunt casting comes in as well, I guess, in the fact that people realise that they can sell more tickets if they have someone famous playing the role, and obviously that impacted the musical theatre climate too. And I feel like I'm missing something or other. I don't know what it is, but it's something. But I feel like I've given a good overview, and I might make another one of these of just like me sprouting information at people who may not know otherwise. I mean, if you follow me on this channel, you probably know a relative amount about musicals, but it's surprising the people that I know that don't. So this is for them. So hello, if you're still watching. But yes, there was no method to that. I was literally just going, every information dump in my brain is going into you right now. So hope you enjoyed it. There was not even an end to it. I literally just went, yeah, I can't think of anything else to say. My special interest is special interested today. But yes, thanks so much for watching this video. It was so bad. This is probably a really bad video, but hope you enjoyed it anyway. Maybe it was helpful. I don't know. Maybe it was. But thank you so much for watching. I don't know why I was doing a thumbs up, but I just did a thumbs down and said like it, subscribe, do all that stuff. Maybe you can tell me stuff about musical theatre that I don't know. I'd be surprised, but you never know. You can learn something new every day. What a video this was. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Keep enjoying musicals as much as me, and I will see you in the next one.